Welcome to this segment on personal boundaries. Personal boundaries come up quite a bit with a lot of my clients who come in saying that they're not happy in their relationship, or things at work are a little bit hectic, or there seems to be misunderstanding with their supervisors or coworkers. I have some clients who talk about misunderstandings can lead to conflicts or even arguments in their personal relationships. Even at school, sometimes when you're with a classmate or someone, sometimes things can get a little out of hand. And what a lot of these folks have in common is a lack of understanding of what personal boundaries are and why they're important to have. My opinion is one of the most vital life skills anyone can possess is the ability to create and maintain personal boundaries in all of your relationships. So in this segment, what we're going to talk about is what are personal boundaries and how you can set them up, and how you can also maintain them with individuals at home, at school, at church, even at work. So let's get started. But before we get started, the first thing we need to do is to establish a definition of what exactly do we mean by personal boundaries. Now, everybody has a different definition, but I have one that I'd like to offer. Personal boundaries are the physical, emotional, mental, sexual, and behavioral limits that we establish in our relationship with folks at home, school, work, church, and even our social setting to protect ourselves. Having these boundaries helps to prevent others from hurting us, being disrespectful, or being used, or perhaps even manipulated by other people. Finally, these boundaries allow for us to show the world who we are, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and how we're going to show up in the world. And so that is my definition of personal boundaries. So I encourage you to take a moment and write down in your journal or on a piece of paper or even on the computer what exactly your definition of personal boundaries. So once you do that, let's go ahead and begin creating and maintaining personal boundaries. The first thing you need to do is you need to identify what your needs are. Everybody has needs, even dogs, cats, birds, your boss, the person at the gas station, the person you said hello at the post office to. Needs are what people identify things that they need to have in their lives. For example, shelter, financial stability, trust, companionship, friendship, clear communications, etc. So it's important for you to understand what are your needs. One of the biggest reasons why people have a hard time with setting boundaries is that they don't know what they need. So once you have a list of needs that you can identify are those of your personal needs, then from there you can take steps in setting your boundaries. So I encourage my clients and the people that I work with to write down on a piece of paper or perhaps in a journal of the things that you need. Again, shelter, companionship, trust, respect. You get the point. Now that you have your list of needs, the next thing we need to do is we need to create and define personal boundary statements. So this step is going to require that you go over the list of your needs and to identify which ones that are important to you at the moment. So for example, if you have a section on your needs list related to relationship, and you want to talk to someone about important needs that you have and boundaries that you want to establish in a relationship, then that is something that we can just go ahead and use as an example. I know that when I made my list, I had a couple of words on there that were very important under relationships, such as trust, communications, and honesty. Those are important needs of mine. So What I'm asking you to do is to identify some needs that are important to you, and then we're going to go ahead and just make a statement around that particular need. So for example, I mentioned trust. You could say something along the lines of, trust is vital in all of my relationships. Trust is vital in all of my relationships. So I went ahead and wrote that down. Then I mentioned communication. I could say something or make a personal boundary statement that's something along the lines of, healthy communication is important in all of my personal relationships. Healthy communication is or are important in all of my relationships. So that I would go ahead and write that down. Another need that was on my particular list under relationships is honesty. So then I can go ahead and create a personal boundary statement. I tolerate honesty in all of my relationships. Or you can say, I will not tolerate dishonesty in any of my personal relationships. So once you convert a need to a personal boundary statement, then you're ready to go ahead and practice sharing those statements with other people. And now you're ready for the next step. The next step is simply to practice sharing your personal boundary statements with another person. So one of the things that I encourage people to do is to identify a person that you trust, somebody that you know that whatever you share is shared in confidence. So when you meet with this individual, it's important that you remind them, hey, what I'm sharing with you is in confidence, and so do I have your confidence? And if they agree to having it in confidence, then you can go ahead and proceed. The next thing I always encourage folks to do is to lay out your expectations. Tell the individual that, listen first, and then I'm going to give you some give you some questions or be open for feedback once I'm done making my personal statements. Again, that's really important that you lay the intentions with the other person that you want to practice sharing your personal boundary statements, and then you'll be open for feedback or questions once you're done. So once you're done with that, then the next thing that I find very helpful is I ask other people, what's it been like for you to set up personal boundaries with other people? With, say, people who are difficult or people who are very surprised that you were setting boundaries. What was it like when someone was upset or somebody was pushing back or resisting your personal boundaries? So remember, it's really important to get feedback from some close friends or family members that can offer you any feedback as you practice setting personal boundaries in your relationships. And now you're ready for the next step. The next step involves you actually going ahead and defending your personal boundaries with a particular person that you would want to establish them with. So for example, in this particular case I'm going to talk about in a moment is a personal boundary, so within a personal relationship. So I'm going to be talking with a particular partner. Now, keep in mind, in this particular step, this is where you get to stand up for yourself. This is where you get to practice having courage and drawing the line in the sand. This is where you get to say, hey, this is not acceptable, or hey, this is acceptable. So this is an important step because it requires a lot of practicing. So just keep that in mind. And another thing to keep in mind is when we go to confront another person, it can be very uncomfortable because many of us don't like personal conflict. And so we tend to shy away from conflicts. And so, you know what, I don't want to bring up this particular comment because I'm afraid the other person's going to get upset and I don't know how to deal with it. So keep in mind that you may feel a little bit uncomfortable and that conflicts are very uncomfortable as well. So, and another thing to keep in mind is that this is a chance for you to set up some expectations and understanding with the other person of how you wish to be treated. This is really important for you to keep in mind. So, as you meet with this person, one of the things I've done with my particular partner, I said, I said to that person, I love you, but it's important that we have this conversation. So please keep an open mind. Do not interrupt me when I'm talking, because it's hard for me to stay focused if you interrupt me. So if you have anything to say, then feel free to write it down, and then later, when it's time for feedback, you can go ahead and you can read what you wrote down. So it's really important that you set up some expectations with the individual, and that they're ready. And then I think it's also important to ask them, are they open to have a conversation about a conflict or misunderstanding? Now, if the other person is not ready for that conversation, then you need to say, okay, when is the good time to have that conversation? And then put them on the hook, and then be able to ask for a particular time and a place where you both can have that conversation. Okay, so that said, then the next thing I'd like to encourage you to keep in mind is use an I statement before you introduce your boundary. So, for example, in the case that I'm about to give you, is my partner hurt my feelings by being very critical in front of friends of mine at the time. And so I used an I statement, and at the end of the I statement is where I got to tell the person what my expectations were, my boundaries, in other words. And so here we go. So the first line of the I statement is I feel. I feel hurt when you are critical towards me in front of other people, because it's embarrassing. I need for you to respect me in front of other people. So again, I feel hurt when you are critical towards me in front of other people, because it's embarrassing. And then the final sentence is, I need you to respect me in front of other people. Now, that last sentence is my personal boundary statement. I need you to respect me in front of other people. So again, if you're meeting with a friend of yours, before you go ahead and confront the person with actually setting a personal boundary, I encourage you to use the I statement as you practice with a friend of yours in confidence, as I mentioned in the previous step. So let's move on to the next step. Okay, so you're now ready for the next step. The next step is to reflect upon making your personal boundary statement to another person. This is an opportunity for you to reflect on how well did you do, or where do you need to improve or to practice. Perhaps maybe you may want to say something along the lines of, what could I do or say differently? You could always go back to the person that you had reviewed your personal boundary statement and discuss how it went with this individual, so that you can get some feedback and eventually learn from the experience. The thing to keep in mind with personal boundaries is that it takes time. Like any new behavior or new habit, personal boundaries take practice. And the more you practice, the more you get real good at establishing boundaries with other people. So, having said that, personal boundaries, if you establish them in ways that are more comfortable for you, you can really begin to have a life of healthy relationships. Remember, healthy boundaries lead to healthy relationships. And as children, many of us didn't learn how to create personal boundaries, and so as adults, we get a second chance, if you will. We get an opportunity to establish boundaries with people in our lives, so that we can pretty much essentially live the life that we want. Remember, back at the statement of personal boundaries that I mentioned to you earlier in the segment, personal boundaries is really letting the world know who you are, how you plan to show up, and that's just pretty simple it. So if you found this video helpful, or you'd like to reach out to me for any questions or any coaching, feel free to uh, contact me at the information below on the screen or at the end of this segment, and I look forward to touching base with you and exploring where I can help you with establishing personal boundaries. So thank you very much for joining me today. Personal boundaries is, as I mentioned earlier, a vital life skill. It is incredibly important that you maintain a very healthy attitude and behavior toward setting up and maintaining personal boundaries with people in your life. And so until next time, thank you for your time and thank you for joining me for today's segment.